Good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Mikey, how are you?
I'm
It's
very
Friday
good.
afternoon. Good. Here we are, 23rd of January, 2026. For those of you who are listening far into the future, we greet you from civilization as it is currently, which is pretty cold for a lot of North America. And we're enduring all of that with great grace and excitement. We're talking today about a field note entitled Skills, Scale, Performance. With me on the first part. Skills. We get better at stuff. It scales performance, but self-identity sustains it. And that's what the field note is really about. Because leaders are drawn to, like, if I just get everybody better, then we're all going to be better and everything's great. Well, no, not entirely, because you can have a lot of skilled people that will just quit. I think we've all probably seen, we've probably been leaders who we hired somebody, we recruited them, we got them on board, they were going great guns, and then they just disappeared. And you're like, wait, I thought you were one of us.
Yeah, no, I could see that there's a lot of reasons why identity would keep people sticky in a role for that reason. I've observed it even with kids saying that they don't want to specialize in a certain sport. The reason that they can't give it up is because even as a 12 or 13-year-old, it feels like it's their whole identity. And so it stays sticky for them, oftentimes longer than it should. So I wonder where this starts for us. Let me ask you about 1982, Scott. Can I ask you about 1982?
Of course, yes. I have a comprehensive photographic memory, and I can viscerally place myself back in 1982. Yeah.
And that's when Kevin Lehman wrote the birth order book. You were familiar with that, the year that it came out?
Yeah, I don't know that I leaned into it real hard then, but I did hear him give a talk, I don't know, like 15, 20 years ago. So it was a good, halfway between then and 1982. And he was still going on that same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I was 8 years old when my mom read it. I was probably 9 or 10, but she talked a lot about it. I remember her being very fond of the idea. But even in the way that the roles are explained in the birth order book about like how an older child acts, how a middle child might act, and where their personalities are formed as a result of those family dynamics, how a younger child acts. She even said, even though she loved talking about the book, she even said, I think you and your brother went through a switch. So there's an opportunity in the birth order book for you to have like completely different roles based upon this idea of like family dynamics can sometimes make you go through a switch.
Right.
So she basically said, she should have said, I don't believe in the birth order, but because it doesn't seem to really affect anything. Anecdotally, look at you and your brother, you're completely different. But instead, she's like, I really love the birth order book. I love everything that it has to say. And I think that you and your brother happen to be an exception to it, right? And so she already, like, even in the way that she read the book, she like chose an identity. It's like she's a birth order person, right?
Oh, okay.
And so even in her opportunity to give up on the
wait. Does she have brothers and sisters?
She has one older brother.
So she was the youngest child. Well,
yes.
That is such a youngest child thing for her to be.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I bring it up to be like, there are ways that we kind of deal with identity in our lives that make me feel like we are way too quick to adopt identity, right? And maybe those concerns only come up when that is like our sole identity, or we have something that becomes like the only thing that we refer to ourselves. Then it becomes, but this field note kind of challenges the idea that maybe we can use identity, but it almost needs to be like, you need to create room in your life that you're like maybe 7 or 8 things. And then your identity is not soul sourced.
Yeah. Well, and what you've actually pointed to, I think, is a helpful way of seeing a couple parts of this field note, because there is this part about, are you part of the team? Like, do you identify as this kind of a person? You pointed this out to Sierra yesterday. She talked about trying to kind of get around this idea of working out in the morning, and she's never been a morning workout person. And then you said, but the way you described it was that you wanted to become a morning workout person, not just that you wanted to work out in the morning. Because when you get that identity, you're like, this is just what I do. I work out in the morning. And so that's a big switch in terms of that. Now, when you have somebody that works for your company or is on your athletic team, or they have an identity, a tribal identification, they're more likely to be fully invested. They're going to be all in. And probably the good part about that is we're all probably wired to a significant degree, just in evolutionary biology, to be sort of tribal. And what I mean by that is it's not just that we might have these identifications. We actually want identifications. I think even with the resistance that you talked about with some of your kids, I think people are out there being like, they're trying to find their thing where they're like, these are my people. And well, they want to click with a certain set.
I think that we want to find our thing inside of that group. Like we want a role. Like I know what I think I know what my family role was as a young kid. And then when we started living in 3 different places, there's a different way for me to kind of identify like what my role in the family is. And I'm still just talking about our nuclear family. A lot of people would say like, well, no, that family dynamic is kind of gone because now there's 20 of you in this larger family set. What's your role there? And I kind of want, it's a different kind of a role, but the same kind of a role, right? And it's not like, is it this younger child who went through a switch in the birth order book who like there'd be no real way for me to kind of talk about like what I actually do. So I'm looking for an identity that actually tells me the way that I should act.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of odd. So my role in my family is like, I kind of think of myself as the memory keeper, right? And so when people come to me or like, Mikey, you remember this stuff more than anybody else does. What happened when we did this? Like that notion of like, and even in the field note, it's like, that's how you reference, like when you want to build somebody up into being that kind of person, you kind of reference them. You remember these, your teammate comes up into you and says, you're the team expert on AI, and then asks you a question that's way over your head. You're like, let me get back to you on it, right? Because you're the expert on AI. Well, me being the memory keeper in my family makes me like, okay, I need to think about 20 years from now what it means to be the memory keeper, right? It immediately goes to like action-oriented things. How should I therefore act? But I can't be the memory, like it's not my sole identity. Could you imagine going through the world like, and I'm the memory keeper, right? That would be a ridiculous way to kind of interact. And I think that's probably my big hang up with the birth order book is that we have the tendency, if there's only 3 identities in every family, right? Older child, middle child, it's not enough.
Well, here's the power, and you've exposed it all because that we have this also. We might have a tribal desire to identify. Some reason we have this need to find some metric that we can apply to everybody, and no insult to HR people. They tend to like to do this. Like, well, we've got this sort of sorting, test that we do, and we can put these people in this bucket, and these people have a certain birth order, and these people have certain big 5 personality aspects, and this person's Enneagram number is this, and this person's an INTJ, and all of that. And what you've actually underlined is really beautiful, I think, which is we are all more nuanced than that. And it probably isn't all that helpful to be like, well, that's just how I am because these are my Enneagram numbers. Now, this is not to say that those things aren't helpful. Some self-knowledge could be requisite to a lot of different things, right? We might want to be able to understand our big 5 aspect, personality aspects, and we might want to understand birth order has an influence. But I think when you start to bucket people and be like, well, you're that person and you're this person, that's different than what this field note is saying. This field note is doing exactly what you said, which is if we say, boy, you've got the best sense of the cultural history, the track record in our organization. You're the go-to on that. When people say, well, how did we ever do that? Mikey, how did we do that? I asked you one of those questions the other day, and I think you didn't remember.
But I think so.
But that's an element of scripting, and there's 2 parts of this in the field note that are beautiful. Like when you say you're just the go-to on AI, right? And then that leads into the back half of the email or of the field note where the admonition is, think of this idea of not only who on the team has that identity, but who on the team is becoming, they're growing, they're moving into that. And that uses the becoming word. Like, boy, you're really becoming the person that we turn to on AI. You can use this as a leader to kind of script into people both current sort of ways of seeing themselves and ways that they can see potential in themselves. And that's deeper than saying, I've now put you into a box. It's actually saying, I'm actually paying attention and I see in you things of real value that you're bringing to the table for everybody. And those things stick. And here's how you know it, because you can think back to when your third grade teacher said something like that, or the coach that you had in high school, or the college professor that said, you're kind of really sharp about that. And we also know it the other way, which is somebody says, well, you're just terrible at that. Like, we can forget a zillion facts in our lives, and we can zero back and we know emotionally how we felt when somebody kind of said that thing to us that made us feel like, yeah, that kind of is who I am. And it really resonated. But we live with those moments. It's very powerful.
Right. So the action that you're describing for leaders is specifically stated as turning behaviors into labels, adjectives, and descriptions of personal identity. So those behaviors, if you're thinking to yourself, I really want this person who's done this a time or two to do it more often, then that's how you do it. But if you're like, I'm trying to identify a way to get somebody to do this, but they've never demonstrated that behavior before, so it's going to be a new behavior I'm trying to introduce, then you need to be careful with that. You don't want your credibility to suffer because you're doing this as a technique to get somebody to act a way that they are not acting.
No. Well, and in fact, it should be the test as we would talk about any kind of admired leader behavior. And those are the things that we define, for those less familiar in our platform, as the very specific things that leaders do around normal leadership challenges, how they give feedback or how they elevate performance. And we've got hundreds of those. But if you use them as a technique, they backfire. You actually want to be the kind of person who is the person who actually can recognize the value in the person, that whether it's the person you meet in the store, whether it's the person on the team where you're like, gosh, you are just full of that kind of energy, or you sort of bring that kind of insight, or we need more of that around us in the world today, where you're just doing that. And I've mentioned this before, and it's funny because I've mentioned Stephen Covey a couple times in the last couple of weeks. It's not like I'm involved in that content or that organization at all. But when I met him, 35 years ago, I was a television reporter. I interviewed him. I interviewed somebody else. He gave me his card. And then a week or two later, I gave him my card. I got a package in the mail that he sent me with some of his other books that he had written before 7 Habits. And then he sent a note, and it just said that he was like, it was such a pleasure to meet you. And he just said, what a fine interviewer I see in you. Now, was I really a fine interviewer? I was a kid. I was just starting in television. I probably asked him a question or two. I'd read his book, I think, probably by that point. Maybe that gave me a little step up. But I probably lived for 10 years on that scripting into me about the nature of like, maybe I never even thought I was a good interviewer. And this guy's like, now he said it, could have been somebody else said it, but it's like those things actually live in people. Now, if you're the kind of leader who just makes it a part of your character that you notice things about people and you feed that back to them, and you also look for the things that are in progress for them, that becomes wildly powerful. Then the field note actually comes to its conclusion, which is when you have people that have a strong identity, and that identity is actually recognized, reinforced, applauded, those people are going to really want to be a part of a team where those things in themselves can flourish. And that becomes very exciting.
Right. So if you're thinking through this and you recognize that you've got two people on your team who might be inadvertently vying for the same identity, right? Right? Not necessarily the same position, right? But the same identity. There might be subtle ways to just kind of redirect that, right? But that's an important thing to kind of recognize as a leader, that a lot of people want their own identity on the team.
Their niche,
Right. And so if it feels like two people are vying for the same identity, it might be up to you as a leader to create two separate names that feel distinct, but even though they are the same. Like, and I wouldn't think that adults are going to be falling for this as a technique.
Yeah, right.
You really do need to think that through, because I'm going to get competitive if I feel like someone else is going to be the memory keeper in my family, right? That's my role.
Well, you already confessed on an earlier edition of Lead Better that you had kind of discovered something that you thought was in the memory of the family, and that you had been discovered it, and then you found out everybody knew that. Everybody always knew that, and you were like,
right,
darn it. Right. So
right.
Look, I don't think that this field note is saying you need to slap bumper stickers on people. I think, look, grown-ups in organizations don't need you to be like, yeah, you're the memory keeper, right? Like with a big thing, and like, but it's more of like, just speak to it with nuance and subtlety, and that's powerful. When I say you have a better sense of who we are and where we've come from, and when we know where we've come from and why we exist, that just really lifts us up all the time. And if I'm just not even making a big deal about it, but I just go to you in meetings and I ask those kind of questions, or when I have an AI question and we go to Jamie about that, or whatever it is, those things are they reinforce those things in ways that just become real. And that's actually what you're looking for. You're not trying to do some artificial thing here. You're trying to produce something that is actually a reflection of reality of what's happening in the team.
Right. And if you're the kind of leader who just hands out nicknames all the time, like what a better way to do that. Like, figure out ways to hand out identities instead of nicknames, right? It'll take some more thinking and more thought. But if you have the tendency to be the nickname guy, like back off on that in a little bit more identity handing. Yeah,
very much so.
Great.
Cool field note. Love it.
Yeah, we'll talk again tomorrow. Bye now.